Hello, I'm Joseph Dillard. Welcome to our online Integral Deep Listening video curricula. In this, our second video on our hardwired cognitive biases that create distortions in our perception of others, dreams, and our world, we will take a look at the in-group, gamblers, fallacies, biases, the post-purchase bias, and neglecting probability bias. The first, in-group, I call the "we are good" bias. It's a specific example of confirmation bias, which we discussed in the first video in the series. The "we are good" bias causes us to overestimate the abilities and value of our family, work, political, religious, or spiritual groups, and underestimate those of our outgroups, like people who live in other countries or those who have different beliefs than we do. This not only isolates us from important outgroup feedback, it goes a long way towards supporting immoral and amoral choices when they are supported and reinforced by our in-group. The "we are good" bias is probably physiologically supported by oxytocin, a powerful neurotransmitter that helps us bond with people in our in-group, at the same time making us suspicious, fearful, and even disdainful of those in outgroups. Ideal interviewing turns outgroups into in-groups. As experienced, dream characters are outgroup members, but when they're interviewed, they become in-group members. But it's more as if we become a member of their group rather than they become members of our group, as a manifestation of the "we are good" bias. Similarly, when we interview others and they interview us, a mutual in-group is created, but one that is not based on our worldview or values, but rather on shared intimacy. In the next cognitive bias, gambler's fallacy, or what I call "I'm lucky" bias, it most fundamentally addresses the belief that previous events will influence future outcomes in situations where they don't. Chance is still operative, and outcomes are 50-50 and not predetermined. Karma is probably the most notorious example of the gambler's fallacy, but in the West, both fate and predestination have been giving karma a good run for its money. The gambler's bias also shows up as the belief that our luck has to eventually change and that good fortune is on the way, which keeps gamblers gambling and drama addicts seeking out destructive, dysfunctional relationships. IDL undercuts the "I'm lucky" bias with something called phenomenology. A phenomenological perspective surfaces and tables our assumptions, such as what a dream character is really like or the cause of some life issue, and instead attempts to respectfully listen to what this or that interviewed emerging potential has to say. In the next cognitive bias, the post-purchase rationalization bias, or what I call the "stupid great idea" bias, we address our tendency to rationalize our purchases of totally unnecessary, faulty, or overly expensive junk by convincing ourselves that it was really a great idea. More broadly, this bias involves justifying all the stupid choices we made in our lives, bad relationship choices, foolish financial decisions, poor educational and employment choices, our addictions, and our mistreatment of others. It's a built-in mechanism designed to make us feel better after we make crappy decisions. It's possible to use this cognitive bias to rationalize away the mistakes of an entire life as dharma, karma, divine order, fate, or predestination. The stupid great idea bias springs from a desire to justify our sense of who we are, our worldview, and to avoid cognitive dissonance. IDEO also uses a phenomenological perspective to deal with this cognitive bias. By surfacing and tabling our assumptions, as we do when we write out our associations to a dream before we interview a character, or when we set ourselves aside in order to allow an interviewed character to be heard, we choose not to project our explanations, sense of meaning, or interpretations onto our experience. This allows perspectives that are interviewed to be heard without the interference of the stupid, great idea cognitive bias. So, moving on to the next cognitive bias, neglecting probability, which might also be called the scaring ourselves for fun bias. Statistically, we have a 1 in 84 chance of dying in a car accident, which is really high risk, as compared to a 1 in 5,000 chance of dying in a plane crash, which is, relatively speaking, very low risk. So why are so few car crashes in the news, while even single-person plane crashes get front-page coverage? Statistically, we are much more likely to be killed by lightning, a Coke machine falling on top of us, or by a donkey kicking us, than being killed by a terrorist. So why are we willing to surrender our freedoms to a police state to protect us from an almost non-existent threat? The scaring ourselves for fun bias affects our inability, it reflects our inability to put danger and risk into proper proportion, meaning that we overstate relatively harmless risks while badly overrating less dangerous ones. Worry is a manifestation of this cognitive bias. We are overemphasizing in our awareness some possible risk instead of taking a solution focus. That is, looking at what degree of risk actually exists and taking action to reduce or eliminate it. IDEO deals with this cognitive bias by acting on the recommendations of interviewed perspectives. When we do so, are our fears greater or diminished? Are we more or less likely to give appropriate attention to genuine fears while dismissing false alarms? Thanks for watching. See you next time.